Hey guys, today we're going to be going over the fifth episode, the computing or Python course. And specifically, we'll be going over iteration or loops in Python. My name is Pranab Putta, and I'm a junior in high school. I'm representing the ECDE Foundation, where we believe that every child deserves an education, regardless of their race, their sex, and etc. Some hobbies that I have include playing video games, hanging out with my friends, and etc. And I wish or I want to share this course with you guys because I believe that it's every person's duty to share the knowledge that they've learned themselves so that others can learn as well. So here's the table of contents of what we're going to be going over today. So first off, we'll be covering iteration in general. Then we'll talk about accumulating outputs using for loops. Then we'll transition over to while loops, what they really are. And then lastly, we'll just compare and contrast for versus while loops. So next up, we'll be going over iteration. So why do we need iteration? Many algorithms in Python or just in general are partially or fully repeating set of steps. And if you look at this function down below, it's fine if you don't know the function format because we will be covering this later. But if you can just look at it, you'll see that it says tip equals check times 0.15. And in the final place, it goes to checks plus tip. And regardless of your Python knowledge, you can just tell that here multiplication is going on. And multiplication involves repeating the step over and over again because you're repeatedly adding a value to another value. So because it's repeating, we can use iteration here because it's repeating a set of steps. This is primarily what iteration hopes to accomplish and make easier for the user. So how do we revise a calculator to offer a table that shows multiple tipping possibilities for any check amount? Let's show tips from 15% to 25%. So this is kind of like a question just to get you guys thinking. You don't exactly have to do it right now, but just start thinking the mindset that how do we simplify an algorithm to involve iteration and just make it easier for the user? So once again, based on the pass function, if you did not use iteration, you would have to do something like this where you have to print many items, many statements, which would be quite tedious to say the least. And obviously this would be the output. But by using the iteration, which includes for loops and while loops, we can provide power and generality and construct iterative cycles of a range of numbers. And if you look on the right, that's kind of the format for a for loop. We'll cover later on, but as you can see, instead of just writing all these print statements out, you can just write down pretty much 3 statements or 3 lines, and it does the same output and it's more effective and easier to write. So here's kind of a simple function. As you can see by the name of the function, it's the sum of the first 5 positive integers. So for us, we can set the sum to 0, and using a for loop, as you can see for I in range, we can update the accumulator and then return the sum. So this is kind of how a function works or for loop, but don't worry about the formatting. We'll cover that soon in, I believe, the next few slides. So next, we'll be talking about accumulating outputs using for loops. So even if you modify the loop variable in the loop, it'll be reset to its next expected value in the next iteration. So never modify the loop variable inside of for loop. So essentially, if you can look here, it says for I in range. So what they're kind of saying is never actually modify the I because the I's keep on iterating, changing values. And if we were to change it, that pretty much just break the loop and you would not get the desired output. So you can add values or delete values to I, but never actually change the whole value itself. And here's the different version of the range function. So the range in the for loop just kind of gives range so that if we say for I in range 0, 5, that's basically all the numbers from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, except 5 because 5 is not included. So if we said for I in range 0, 5, print I, it would print 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, because those are the numbers in that range. And if you look here, the number after 5, that's like the increment. So if we said for I in range 0, 5, 1, it would do an increment of 1. And by default, if you do not define that, it would be 1. But you can define that to be -1, +2, +3, or whatever you want it to be. So here's a for loop example for decrement or decrement. As you can see, as I said, in this case, it's -2. So the numbers would be 10 to 0, or not 0, 1, because 0 is not included, but it would be decremented by 2. So the last value would be 2. And in here, it'd be a changing increment where you can, you can tweak it to make it 1, 3, and 25. And here's a for loop example with changing start and end, where we change the first value and the last value, or the range. And also feel free to pause the video at any time, just to, if I'm going too fast, or if you just want to check it out in more detail. So what happens in loop variable? So this is kind of like a step-by-step basis about what happens in each time the function loops. So when it loops first, the starting value is 0, but then when it loops the second time, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and it keeps printing hello world each time. And once again, here's a for loop example. And here's kind of the for loop syntax. Basically, the for is a reserved word and cannot be used as a variable name. So some reserved words other than the for loop is while, define, and etc. And then after the for is where you the loop variable. So in our past examples, it was I, but it can pretty much be anything. And then in range, just start and end and start plus step. You basically just give the range. And also make sure after you define the first line of the for loop, always indent. Usually Python just indents automatically for you, but just in case, just remember that it's 4 spaces, and don't use tabs because tabs can be inconsistent. So many programmers just try to keep it to 4 spaces. And also after the first statement, make sure to keep a colon so that you can define, so that the program knows that you're defining some other program below that. And now we can move on to while loops. So here's kind of the basic functionality of while loop. If you remember with the for loops, basically they function on the premise that we knew when the function would start and end. But in the while loop, it's kind of different. If the loop condition becomes false in the loop body still run to completion before you exit the loop and go into the next step. So essentially the while loop would basically function as until a condition is false. So we generally use a while loop because we don't know when the start and end is. So here's basically the syntax for while loop. It's kind of similar to the for loop, except that you just know range, because instead you're replacing the range with a condition, and the indentation still remains the same, and etc. So here are a few examples of while loops. So if you look at the first example where you print the first 10 positive integers, we first declare I to be 1. And while I is less than 11, we print I. But then after that, we're incrementing I by 1. So it would print, I believe, 10 times before it would not print, because by that time, I would be greater than 11, which basically makes the condition false. So if you look on the right, I equals 0. While I is less than 10, I is equal to I plus 1 and print I. So if you would like, pause the video at this moment and take the next few minutes to figure out what the value of I is when we exit the loop. You can pause the video or whatnot. Okay, I hope that question got you thinking about how the functions work. Let's move on. So when you're doing while loops, it's important to be careful with infinite loops, because it's pretty easy to make a loop going on forever and forever, because as you recall, a while loop only breaks when a condition is false. So if you look at the first example, the condition is always true because the loop variable is never changed in the body of the loop. So I is always 1. So as a result, I is always less than 11. So I is just printed on forever and forever. And obviously this will crash your computer and program. So now we'll go on to compare for and while loops. So here are two of the same actions performed, but one using the for loop and one using the while loop. So the first one is the while loop, and as you can see, it pretty much prints the 5 first even integers. As you can see, it increments by 2 when it says I equals I plus 2. And then to the right, it's pretty much the same thing, but we obviously define a range with an increment to start and end. So as you can see, while loops and for loops, they can pretty much solve the same concept, but in some situations, one will be easier than the other. So when to use for while loops. if you know in advance how many times you want to run a loop, use a for loop. But if you do not know the number of iterations needed, use a while loop, where in case you can define a condition that has to be met for the function to run. And that pretty much wraps it up. In our next video, we'll go over algorithmic thinking and loops and conditionals. And I'm also thinking of, in the beginning of the next video, to do an actual Python session on Visual Studio Code or another Python platform, so that we can actually demonstrate the examples that I've said in this video in the past ones, but in an actual platform, just so you guys can visualize it in a better way. But yeah, if I do that, just make sure to download a Python extension or an IDE on your computer. I recommend PyCharm, or what I'm going to be using is Visual Studio Code. They're both free and they're great platforms to actually use. So try to get that set up with by the time we come back with the next video. So thank you for listening. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe down below. If you want to check out more videos on history, business, etc., and also Java, you can click on the ACD channel below. We have many videos of diverse fields. So yeah, make sure to check that out if you're interested. I'll see you guys next time.